Hi there, my name's Ben Gibbs and welcome to this module of the Management Micro Skills series, Tips for Becoming a Better Manager. In this module, we'll be looking at how to deal with workplace conflict. We'll look at how to approach it, how to prepare for it, and then how to have the conversations that are required to work towards a resolution. We'll also look at how to repair the relationships that might have been damaged in the process. This short slide set provides you with a selection of material from the main guidance document, which you'll find in the platform. Hope that you enjoy the resource and that you find it useful in your practice. Now, every workplace has its fair share of disagreements. We argue about work-related matters, we have different ideas about how to do things, we have debates about which plan to follow, and we even have little power struggles about who should be in charge. Sometimes we just might feel awkward and act it. And the thing is, conflict in and of itself isn't really the problem. It's how we handle it that matters. When handled badly or avoided altogether, conflict can mess up projects, damage relationships, or lose business. Initiatives slow to a standstill, while warring factions sort out their differences, and teams risk not meeting their goals at all. Energy and creativity are diminished, and instead of acting on goodwill, people become absorbed by their differences. People often have a very long memory too when it comes to conflict. Conflict can also take an emotional toll beyond the workplace boundary. We may lose sleep, get grumpy, and take it out on people at home. And all because we're worried about what to say to a colleague with whom we're fighting, or are agonising over whether we could have better articulated our perspective on a contentious issue. All that said, when handled well, conflict can have a positive outcome. It can spark creativity and new ideas, and even strengthen bonds with co-workers. It can help a team to come to terms with difficult situations, synthesize diverse perspectives, and to make sure that solutions are well thought out. It's uncomfortable, but it can be a critical process in identifying and mitigating risks, leading to better outcomes, personal and professional growth, and stronger relationships. When you're not afraid to constructively disagree or even fight about important issues at work, you're also more likely to be happier to go to the office, to be satisfied with what you accomplish, and to enjoy interactions with your colleagues. Instead of feeling as if you have to walk on eggshells, you can focus on getting your work done. In fact, that's pretty much the definition of psychological safety. For conflict to have any of these benefits, though, you have to learn the skills to proactively address problems and engage in healthy discussions. The guide that accompanies this module aims to help you break through the scary and emotional stuff that can take practical and then take a practical, ordered approach to dealing with conflict. It starts by helping you understand the nature of the conflict itself, what it is and what it's not, and it then goes into the options that you have for handling conflict, before exploring what you need to know about people's tendencies when engaged in conflict. The guide then dives into the practice of managing conflict, from how to work out what you're up against, to sorting out a goal, planning an approach, getting stuck in, and then coming constructively at the other side. Conflict can feel less scary and more manageable when you approach it methodically. You'll still need to be flexible and adapt as the situation evolves and changes, but understanding the basics is important. To be a truly effective manager, you have to be able to deal with conflict. Otherwise, you'll either end up fighting with everyone or just giving people what they want. Now, conflicts in the workplace are generally about four things. One of four things: relationship, task, process, and status. In order to manage one, you have to work out what's at its roots. When we get into a conflict, we usually assume that it's about relationships. And very often, conflicts about something else can become about relationship. They usually involve one or both parties feeling disrespected or upset, and can lead to snapping at one another in meetings, avoiding eye contact, and arguing over trivial matters. But the most common type of meeting at work are actually about task. The most common type of conflict at work, are about tasks, disagreements about the agenda for a meeting, how to measure the outcomes of a project, or when to adopt or roll out a new form of practice, for example. These are what we might think of as functional disagreements. Another common reason for conflict is disagreement about how something is being done, rather than what's being done. These process conflicts can include differences of opinion on how to implement a new marketing policy, for example, how decisions should be made in a meeting, or what method should be used for a piece of action research. Or there are disagreements about status, about who's in charge or deserves credit for something. Of course, conflicts are rarely one or the other of these. There are usually many things going on, and a conflict may start as one type and expand into another. Once you've thought about what type of conflict you're working with, you can decide how to deal with it. Although there are many approaches, it basically boils down to 4 options. You can do nothing and walk away. You can address it indirectly and skirt around the issue. You can address it directly and confront the issue head on, or you can just get out and exit the situation altogether. Each approach has its upsides and its downsides, but each is a valid choice given the context you're in, and the guide goes into these in some detail. One thing to think about carefully is your natural tendency when faced with conflict. Are you an avoider or a seeker? Do you shy away from disagreements and value harmony? Or do you love a good ding-dong and feel that directness and honesty is important? Developing a degree of self-awareness about this, perhaps including feedback or an assessment, is a good thing to do before you engage in managing particularly sticky conflicts, as your tendency will drive your behaviour, whether you know it or not. So you've prepared, you've decided that you need to confront the conflict head on, and you now need to get down to the hard bit of actually doing so. The first thing you do is assess the situation that you have in front of you. You should first try to understand the other person. What's their motive? What's their tendency? And what's likely to work best for them? Then you need to identify what type of conflict you're dealing with, and then what your goal is in dealing with it. You should then pick an approach that suits your needs and your tendency. Ensure you're cool, calm, and collected, and then be ready to adapt as you go. Once you've got an idea of where you stand, you need to prepare for the conversation itself, and this involves considering your mindset and the other person's. What's their perspective on the situation that has led to the conflict? And how might they see the conflict itself? Is their view likely to be different to yours? What's the wider organisational context you're in, too? And how does that matter? What will you say, when the best, and when's the best moment to say it? And where's the best place? And if you need to, have you vented before you go in? Or are you going in fully loaded and ready to blow? At this point, you may be wondering whether all of this is really necessary for a 10-minute conversation. And the answer is yes. It's a bit of a faff, but the payoff is potentially huge, particularly when you consider the downside of a badly managed or unresolved conflict. Going into the conversation with the right mindset and feeling confident and knowing what you want to achieve is the foundation to a constructive discussion. But how do you actually have that conversation? Well, first you need to frame it. Your first few sentences are important, so use them carefully to set the conversation up as a collaborative space. Establish the common ground between you, label the type of conflict you think you're having, lay out some ground rules, ask your counterpart for advice, and focus on the future. You should be trying to manage the emotions in the room, including yours, but perhaps most importantly, you should be listening well. Even if you think you already understand your counterpart's point of view, you're here to hear what they have to say. And this is especially important if you're trying to get to the root of the conflict. So ask, express your interest in what they have to say and the feelings that lie behind the words. And this means really listening, not so you can reply with a great next line, but so that you can understand. Ask the right questions and listen well, and this can help reveal important information about what's required for a resolution. But then when it's your turn to share your story, you need to speak from your own perspective and explain yourself in a way that ensures you're genuinely understood. And this starts with owning your perspective. You're talking about yourself and your opinion, not them and theirs. Don't hide behind we, he or she, and try not to use you. Use I. Sometimes things will get tricky and they will veer off course, and the guide provides you with a suite of useful ways to get things back on track. The intention of having these constructive conversations is to try and make progress towards a resolution. Sometimes one will naturally emerge as you talk. It may be that there was a misunderstanding and it's now cleared up. Or it may be that one or other of you is now content with the other's plan or with a new one. This doesn't happen organically. You'll have to work at it more consciously. And that's the focus of the final part of the guide. When addressing the conflict directly, the final step is to negotiate a resolution with your counterpart. The process for doing this is to start wide and then narrow down the options. So what might a resolution look like? This will largely depend on the type of conflict you are having. With task and process conflicts, the resolution is likely to be an agreement about what it is that you want to accomplish. With status conflict, the resolution might involve reaching an understanding about who will lead a project or whose team is responsible for the success of an initiative. Relationship conflicts are a bit more complex because there's usually some healing required, but resolution might involve each person agreeing to do something differently in the future or to address a difficult behaviour. In any of these cases, though, a resolution needs to meet the same three criteria. It should satisfy as many people as possible, it should be fair and reasonable, and it should enable the relationship to remain intact. The key is to find a way of working well with your counterpart and being creative. You'll need to think about what you can offer in return if the proposal requires your counterpart to give ground. Exchange is important in these things, even if it's largely simple. Sometimes, though, you'll need to accept that there's no resolution to be had, and then it's really just a case of learning and moving on for all parties. Whether you're shaking hands after a constructive conversation and focusing on the agreed resolution, or trying to accept that there can be no resolution, or even thinking about how to find a new job, it's important to be aware that even if you have agreed enthusiastically on a resolution, in fact, even if you've opted to do nothing, it's more than likely that the relationship will need some attention too. This process of repair requires reflection, forward thinking, and a focus on building rapport and reconnecting. Sometimes an apology can be pivotal, but the process always requires time, and occasionally it requires other people too. For most of us, the word conflict conjures up difficult images of struggle and argument, more heat than light. We all want people to like us, and we also want them to see just how brilliant we are and how successful everyone would be if only they did what we suggest and gave us what we needed, and then still thought that we were awesome at the end of the day. But of course, that's all just a fantasy. The workplace is not perfect, but it doesn't have to be. And when we get into conflict with people at work, it doesn't have to be all negative. Going through difficult experiences can enable the development of the strongest and most resilient of relationships. When these are well managed, or when conflict is well managed, this can enable us to learn about one another and about ourselves, to improve how we manage the next conflict that comes along, and to address organisational culture so that it becomes more psychologically safe. Knowing how to manage conflict well at work won't make it go away, but it will make dealing with disagreements easier and less stressful. Whether you're experiencing conflict with your direct report or your boss or someone else inside or outside the organisation, you now have the tools that you need to assess the situation and to choose an approach that works best for you. As you now know, directly addressing the conflict is just one alternative. You also need to know when to walk away or to get out of the relationship altogether. But if you choose to sit down with your counterpart, you're now better equipped to prepare for and engage in a difficult conversation, managing you and your counterpart's emotions and developing the resolution together. All the very best. Thank you.